Hi there, I'm Lance, and these are my legends. I'd love to have you make comments in the comment section or please subscribe. Thank you. I love to see animals in their natural habitat. Animals that are captured, confined, have a tendency to lose some of their characteristics in their nature as they're domesticated. Animals in their natural habitat tend to show us a general personalities of their type of animal. A good example of this is a mountain goat. Compared to other animals of similar size like deer, when you come across a deer in the wild, they tend to just bound off just as fast as they can get away. They don't care, they just gotta get out of there. Mountain goats, on the other hand, are a lot more casual. They are a little more comfortable in their environment. Back in the days of Walkmans, I was running up Maybird Gulch, and I came up over the steepest part of the terrain, just where it starts to level out into the granite. And I stumbled onto a group of 8 of the original mountain goats that were transplanted into the Wasatch by Dr. Jorgensen. And they were some old goats in the group, and they just kind of looked at me, and it's kind of like, oh, there goes the neighborhood. Let's get out of here. And then they just kind of slowly meandered off. They did leave. They didn't want to be around me. But other animals, on the other hand, particularly the raptors, the large birds of prey, have another way of defense and a territorialism that is fascinating to witness. Generally, and this may offend some people, I love to see up close and personal animals. And so when I see a nest of a big raptor, I like to go investigate it, especially in the spring. I don't touch them, and I don't disturb the nest in any way. We were out in the West Desert and came across this rough-legged hawk nest, and the parents had been very busy, as you can see, gathering food for their little ayahs, little baby hawks. They'd gathered what we call juniper, but it's just the bark of the trees in the area out there in the West Desert. We were climbing up an old mining tower and with my grandkids, and stumbled across a nest that had 2 little baby ayats in it. But the mom didn't like us being there, and she tried to drive us away. I've also had a lot of experiences with other birds, especially eagles, as I fly around the Wasatch. Frequently I'll be flying, and an eagle, golden eagles particularly in the summertime, populate the Wasatch, will be in their territory, and they like to come take a look and see, because we don't have motors in a hang glider, we're flying at similar speeds to an eagle, and so they come and check us out. They have a lot more dexterity in the air, and so they tend to just come in, take a look, and disappear. But occasionally there's been instances, especially in the early history of hang gliding, where eagles have attacked free flight pilots, particularly hang gliders in the early days, and a few paragliders have had some entanglement with eagles as well. In the early 70s, the golden eagle that swooped down on top of a standard regalo cut off its head in the top rigging that comes off the king post. So it's something that our flight patterns are similar enough to them that they sometimes feel that we're invading their territory, and they do a territorial display. In World War I, when aviation really became part of war, it was established quite early that a dominant position is above and behind the other pilot. So I'd like to tell you a story about a situation where I had a little flying contest with a young golden eagle, and I had to show him who the better pilot was. Back before the days of GoPros, which that previous picture I showed you was taken with a GoPro, I used to fly with this camera. And so as I tell this story and show you the pictures, imagine having to set the aperture and the shutter speed, zooming in or zooming out, getting all that ready, and then holding the camera. In the meantime, remember, you're flying a hang glider, so you really can't let go. It's a lot harder than letting go of the steering wheel of a car because you can't steer with your knees. So this is how I took a lot of the pictures that I use in my videos, is with this camera. One day in the afternoon, I took off Squaw Peak. When you launch off Squaw Peak, it's not a high launch. You have to take the first thermal that comes along. A lot of people, especially as they learn to hang glide, don't get up on, we call it inspo, for years, because it's only about 1,800 feet above the valley floor, and there's power lines and stuff in the foothills, so you have maybe a 500 to 800 foot window of altitude that you can expand as you look for lift. And on this particular day, I was flying in a Glide Zilla. And just a little background on the Glide Zilla, Pete Brock was the owner of UP International, and it was a great hang gliding company. Pete is the guy that designed the split window vet and several bodies, the Shelby GT500s, the early fastback Mustangs. Those were all Pete Brock's designs. And Corvettes, for years, Pete designed those. And he was in charge of the Datsun team when they designed the 240Z. So he was very much into aerodynamics. He began a hang gliding company in the days when hang gliders were just barely coming out. Those standard regalos were the accepted frame and design. And then Roy Haggard and Pete began to evolve, and they came up with the Dragonfly and the Mosquito, and eventually a shaped wing that was held in a wing shape called a Comet. And they really revolutionized hang gliding. And hang gliding became much, much safer. We flew a lot faster. We didn't have to worry about things. But some people bought a standard regalo, a Brock. It was even before UP, in a garage sale in California, and their child was killed on that glider. And they sued Pete, and so he decided to quit the hang gliding business. It was a real loss, in my opinion, to the industry. And just before they shut down that factory, my friend J.C. Brown had designed a glider called the Glide Zilla. Crazy name, but he and my friend Larry Tudor were at the factory as it was shutting down, and the very last glider that they built for me. It was a blue, yellow, and white glider, which were the colors I liked. And I had just been married a couple of years, and they showed up at the house, and they brought this glider, and they said, "We built this glider for you, Lance." I was just a young married, and it was $1,100. They were going to give it to me at factory cost. I didn't have the heart to say, I can't take that glider, because these two guys couldn't afford to eat $1,100. It was part of their money from the year they'd been working with Pete and at the factory. I didn't dare tell my wife either. And so I took the glider, and I had an OVR glider that was getting a little old, and I just kept it hanging in the garage, and I took this brand new glider, and I took it over to my friend Jimmy's house and kept it in his garage. And for about 2 months, every time I went hang gliding, I'd just grab my harness and leave my old hang glider in the garage. I didn't even think about it. I'd go over to Jimmy's, grab my new Glidezilla, and go flying. After about 2 months, I grabbed my wife. I said, "Sherry, I got to confess something." And she immediately broke down. She had decided that I was having an affair because I kept going hang gliding without my hang glider. She was so relieved to find out that I wasn't having an affair that I just bought a new hang glider and didn't dare tell her. So you young married people that are trying to figure out how to tell your wife, I'm not saying that's the best way to do it, but that's how I did it. It worked out pretty well. She was actually glad I bought a new hang glider. And I was in that hang glider one afternoon and was flying up off Squaw Peak, and I got up on Cascade and then crossed over to Mount Timpanogos. Mount Timpanogos is a big, long spine, probably 15 miles long, just a beautiful big spine. And then there's a big canyon. American Fork Canyon is very narrow at the front, but really far across as you get back in the canyon. And so crossing over on the spine of Timpanogos over to Box Elder Peak, you have to be pretty high, and you're committed. And especially in gliders of that age, you had to really believe you could make it. And there's only a handful of hang gliders that have ever landed in American Fork Canyon. I'm one of them. That'll be a story I tell you sometime, but not today. I was flying along. It was a beautiful spring day. The sky was that beautiful, deep spring blue that we get. And there were beautiful clouds, just little puffy cumulus clouds. And I was right up in the clouds. And I was having a beautiful flight. When you're flying a hang glider, you're on your stomach and you're looking down. And, you can lift your head and look around, but you're above the peaks, and so there's really not that much to see up above you. And as you get really high and as you learn to fly, you learn to fly the sky. So you do watch the clouds and not the terrain quite as much. But I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and I turned and looked, and there was a young golden eagle directly above me and behind me. And no matter what I did, if I turned, he turned. And I'd played this game with Larry in my hang glider, and Larry is the best pilot of all times. And if he got above you and behind you, there was no shaking him. And that's kind of how this eagle was. He was just everything I did. If I dove, he dove. And if I turned, he turned. And so I turned, and at first I had to set a big wide opening and have a quick shutter release, and then I turned while I'm trying to steer my hang glider and took a picture of this golden eagle following me, because he was just on me like glue and just like white on rice, and just wouldn't leave me. It was obviously a territorial display, a way of dominance that this eagle, he had about a 5.5, 6 foot span, and he wanted to show me that this was his turf. So I flew for quite a while, probably 5 minutes, doing different turns and thermaling, circling in thermals, and he just stayed right above me, right behind me, no matter what I did. And so I finally decided I've had enough of this. So I started to do hammerhead stalls. Aerobatics and hang gliders are fun, but it takes both hands, and it takes a lot of control. And there's a lot of torque, and there's a lot of tension involved. But to do a hammerhead stall, you pull the bar in, and you get all your weight in front of the control bar. You get going 80, 90 miles an hour straight down. And then you let the glider come up. And then just as your glider starts to stall, and you can feel and hear and sense a stall, and just as it starts to stall, you stuff the bar again, dive down, and then come up, and then just as you're stalling out, you drop back down again. And I did about 8 or 10 hammerhead stalls. When you're doing aerobatics in a glider, you got to have enough speed that you can do what you want to do. A hammerhead stall is one maneuver. Another maneuver is a loop, where you actually can pull in and dive down, and then you just go right up over the top. You pull in again, and it's wonderful. Hang gliding is all of a sudden 3-dimensional in your travel. You're not 2-dimensional like we are on the ground. I just love doing aerobatics. People used to get mad at me back in the old days, and I feel like it's prepared me for some of the situations that present themselves in the air by nature itself. You get spit out of thermals, you get spun by different currents, and you can be flipped upside down. And if you're not comfortable being upside down in your hang glider, you're going to stall while you're upside down and tumble, and you'll have to throw a chute. I've had a lot of friends that have had to throw their chutes. I've lost a few friends that didn't get their deployment successfully. But in this situation with this eagle, after I had done about 8 or 10 hammerhead stalls, he was kind of getting in the groove of doing these hammerhead stalls with me and just following me. And I got my camera out, and I set it for the fastest shutter speed possible and the widest angle possible. And then at the bottom of my dive, I spun the glider around really fast, let go of the control bar, and took this picture. This poor eagle, he was just a teenager. He thought for sure he was going to hit me. And I've never seen an eagle do anything like this. He was like, and he had his primaries all out, and his tail was pulled up underneath, and he went by me like, yeah. He barely missed me. And I got this picture. And it's one of my very favorite pictures I've ever taken. I landed on the ground, think this was going to be in National Geographic. It never made it. It has been in a few publications, just flying free flight publications, but never been in anything else. And then I did a few more hammerhead stalls and spun it around right at the bottom of the dive. I spun the glider around. Well, this time he'd figured it out. He knew I was setting him up again. And so he decided just to come by me, and his primaries were all tweaked tight. His tail was tucked, and he flew by me at about 80 miles an hour, just right as close as he could go without hitting me, and just flew by. By then, we were kind of in the same airspace. He wasn't above me or behind me anymore. We were flying along, and all of a sudden, we'd kind of gotten to know each other a little bit. So then the Territorial thing took over again, and we began to have a bit of a flying contest. And he was trying to get above me, and I was trying to get above him, and I found a big fat thermal. I was up about 15,000 feet, so half a mile above the nearest peak. And I started circling, and he was right there with me. I mean, he was right there with me, and we were circling and circling, but I had happened to pick a thermal that was an advantage to me, and not as much to him. He could have kicked my butt if I'd have been flying in a little narrow, teeny thermal where I had to really crank it up at an extreme angle to stay in it, because he could thermal more efficiently with a tighter radius. But the thermal was so big at that point that I had just a very slight wing angle. And within a couple of minutes, I was about 150, 200 feet above him. I had to record the moment, and what I did basically was just lean down and take a picture of my feet with the camera upside down. So this picture was actually taken upside down, but right after I took this picture, that eagle decided that he'd had enough, and by then I was a couple of 100 feet above him. And it's very discouraging when you're in a thermal with somebody and you're trying to establish who the better pilot is. And I've been in that situation a lot of times with a lot of different pilots, and especially if you get somebody like Larry Tudor up above you, you just after a while think, I'm going to go to another thermal because I'm not going to make it in this one to get above him. And that's what this eagle did. He just left and booked away and flew off towards Snowbird. So I went over to Lone Peak, flew around for a while, waited for the north winds, and then turned and came back, just kind of came along with the wind and landed back at my car. And when I landed, I just couldn't wait to go get the slides developed, because like I say, I thought they were going to be on the cover of National Geographic, but I couldn't even get the hang gliding magazine to publish them at the time. I was the only one excited about them. So that's my story of flying with a golden eagle. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening today. I enjoy your comments, so please feel free to comment on this video. And also, I'm trying to build my subscription base, so please subscribe. It's free. It just takes a few seconds. There's a subscribe button right down there in the corner. I appreciate your support, and there are more stories coming. I've got some interviews lined up with other legends. I've mentioned Larry Tudor. He's still down in South America, but there are other people that I'm going to interview in the near future, and I'm excited to get some of them here and have them tell you some of their legend stories, because legends happen to people, everyday people like me and you, and we need to share them with one another. Thanks for listening today.